Who do you bloody think you are? Brian Clough.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to Match Day Matinee, where we take our love for football and movies, combine them, and talk about the best soccer movies that are available today. My name is Raghav Sandhu, and I'm a blogger and web expert that's also a co-founder of the Saga City Collective that wants to get a Canadian Premier League team to the beautiful city of Mississauga. I'm also a supporter of Toronto FC and Liverpool, and I'm joined by...
My name is Mark Alarm. I am a graphic designer, also from Mississauga. I'm a co-founder of SEC as well, Saga City Collective. You can find me on Instagram at A3Football, where I share my work, travels, a little bit of football culture, and my love of the domestic game. I'm a TFC supporter, and now I'll throw it over to Adam.
Hi, I'm Adam. I also live in Mississauga, originally from England. Big Portsmouth fan. And my other projects are around the internet are I like to collect and rank football video games on a website and YouTube channel called Joypads for Goalposts.
All right, thanks, Adam. So today we're going to be talking about The Damned United. This is a 2009 film produced by BBC Films and Left Bank Pictures. It stars Michael Sheen as Brian Clough, Timothy Spall as Peter Taylor, Colm Meaney as Don Revie. Do you guys know who directed this movie?
Tom Hooper.
Oh, and you know why?
It's Tom Hooper, yeah.
Tom Hooper. So Tom Hooper has been in the news a bit lately. Before a bigger news story covered the mainstream media. But do you know why Tom Hooper's been in the news a bit lately? His latest film. It's kind of a big deal.
Clue.
Is it The Gentleman? No, that's Guy Ritchie.
No, you're thinking too high.
What is this mystery?
It's not for good reasons. I'll give you guys that. So he actually did also direct The King's Speech. He did Les Mis in 2012. The Danish Girl, which were all really well received. He did 2 episodes of His Dark Materials, which I believe is that new HBO series with Daniel Craig. And then he also had another film in 2019 based on a earlier work. You guys want a clue?
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, it's really CGI heavy.
Oh, Cats.
Oh, wow.
Oh,
Cats,
he's
yes.
responsible for that monstrosity.
Yes. Yeah.
Oh, wow.
So Cats, which shouldn't be an indication of his work, because I enjoyed The Damned United. I thought it was a really good movie. I don't know about you guys.
Cats.
Yeah. So I probably won't watch Cats. I may go back and watch King's Speech. But The Damned United was a good movie. So now I'm going to throw it over to Adam. Tell us a little bit about the movie, the plot, some details.
So the movie centers on the story of a famous English manager, Brian Clough, and it kind of focuses on his time first at Derby County and at Leeds United, with very much a focus on his rivalry with the legendary Leeds manager Don Revie. It also has a big, the core relationship outside of that in the movie is the relationship with Peter Taylor, who was his assistant manager for much of that time. It's based on a true story, so it's kind of one of those movies where there's a lot of fact to it, but then some of the points are kind of embellished upon. The movie jumps between 2 kind of eras, so it starts off opening in Leeds in 1974 when Clough's taking over Leeds in kind of the aftermath of Don Revie leaving for England, and it also rolls us back quite a few times to 1967-73 where Clough brought Derby County from basically the bottom of the Football League all the way to the very top. Brian Clough is one of the most famous England managers there's ever been. He managed Hartlepool, Derby, Brighton, Leeds and Nottingham Forest. He was a very prolific goal scorer of Middlesbrough, scored quite a lot of goals with them, but unfortunately got injured, had to retire at 29 because of a cruciate ligament injury. They were as prevalent, that was a career-ending injury back then. You didn't recover from it like you do now. He met Peter Taylor when Peter Taylor was a goalie at Middlesbrough as well, and they were really good friends. Peter Taylor's kind of more, we'll go through it when we get through the film, but Taylor was very much the guy that found the players. He was like an old school scout who would go and find players you'd never think of. And then Don Revie's background, I'm not sure how much we want to get into him. He was one of the most successful Leeds managers ever. He led them to a lot of titles in their 13-year history. They won a hell of a lot of trophies. He left Leeds in somewhat controversial style after England. And you guys might not necessarily know about this game. England played Poland in 1973 to qualify for the World Cup, and basically all they had to do, I think they just had to win by 1 goal to qualify for the World Cup. And Poland had a very gangly, stupid goalkeeper who was known for his kind of unorthodox. Like, this was an era where keepers didn't use their feet as much, didn't save with their feet. But this guy did. He was called Jan Tomowski, I think was his name. And so much so that Brian Clough actually called him a circus clown before the game. In this game, England proceeded to have 36 shots on target. Poland had 2, and Poland, I think, won the game. So then Poland qualified for the World Cup. England didn't. World Cup winning manager Alf Ramsey was fired, and Don Revie took his place as England manager.
So, Adam, let me ask you, what happened there? Because England won in '66. So, two World Cup cycles.
Yeah.
Yeah. So two World Cup cycles later, they're knocked out. They're not even qualifying.
Yeah, the world kind of caught up with them a little bit. England still very much believed in their old system of, what was it called? They didn't catch up to the attacking play and still believed in like the old British way of playing. I actually have a book of a FA training manual from like 1967, and they still believed in this it was almost like if you were to compare it to a formation now, it'd be like a 4-2-4. And it was just like the quickest you can get the ball up to those 4 attacking players, that's all that mattered. And kind of other nations started to catch up to them. We didn't have as skillful players by then. People were starting to retire.
Yeah, it's a funny little history that the English national team has. I mean, for somebody like me that is mostly raised here in this part of the world, I also hear that Brian Clough is the best manager England never had. Can you tell us a little bit more about that?
I think that's it's the notion of how much he won. Like, we'll probably get into it when we get towards the end of the film, but he's the only English manager to have ever won the Champions League back-to-back, and he probably will be the only ever one. And the fact that he brought Derby and Notts Forest up from like lower divisions to win titles and be so dominant with like shoestring budgets. They're not necessarily, they're more provincial clubs. They're not the big powerhouses of like the Londons and the Manchester clubs. And his teams played really good football. But the problem is, and you see this a lot in the film, the controversial interviews you see him giving on like the Michael Parkinson show and stuff, that all happened. He was as famous for being far too outspoken, and I think that's what scared the FA off ever even considering appointing him, because it was just too controversial appointment. Similar thing happened recent history is Harry Redknapp got cleared of taking bungs on the side, and everyone assumed he would be the next England manager, but he's so outspoken about everything they gave it to a safe pair of hands in Roy Hodgson instead. England kind of have this history. Gareth Southgate's not too different actually. After all, everything that happened with Sam Allardyce getting fired after one game, they gave it to Gareth Southgate, thinking a safe pair of hands, an inside man. It's kind of what they've done, and Don Revie was one of those like favourites, kind of. It's not too dissimilar. I don't know if we want to get into. I started this off about Don Revie. Like, do we want? Is this the point where I have my rant about what a shithead he was?
I think let's leave that for later in the podcast.
Because it does happen after the events of the movie, I guess.
Well, we can talk about that after, but I think shifting focus back to the movie, I think what Mark was mentioning before, basically with Tom Hooper having directed Les Mis, The King's Speech, and The Damned United, you can kind of see these visual tones, just a visualization of how he shoots his movies. They're truly special. And The Damned United, not even just as a soccer movie, but just as a film, evoked so much emotion that it's just a great film all on its own.
Yeah, it's a gorgeous movie. I mean, if you look at it, they really use, in the 70s, they really switched to a style of film where they relied more on natural light, so you would get a lot more grain in the film. And you can really see that kind of like in the lifted blacks, how everything kind of has this low contrast look. And then colors themselves kind of have this like crushed look where it almost looks like they're pastel, right? It looks amazing. Like there's a lot of shots. There's that one where he's in the manager's office and he's kind of just watching the crowd. The score. Yeah, that was gorgeous. Yeah, but that was one thing I wanted to ask you guys. I'm not sure if it was or not, but did they use archival footage of matches? Like there's shots when it's clear like it's recorded for this movie where they're really tight and kind of claustrophobic. But then there's shots where it's kind of overhead. And like, is that archival footage that they've inserted into the movie?
Yeah, nearly all of that is. The only ones that aren't are the close-up ones, and you'll notice nothing of real skill happens in those close-ups. It'll just be a player kicking the ball, and that's it. Because I guess the actors aren't skilled enough. So yeah, they've kind of interchanged between the two. So all of it, where it's grainy and old, like has that actual style, is all actual archival footage, and that's like most obvious when it's the Charity Shield game at the beginning of the season, and it's showing all the players fighting and stuff, and you see Kevin Keegan and stuff, and it's like that's the actual footage.
Was that right at the begining of the movie? With the,
no, that's later on when Clough has his first game.
Yeah, so opening the movie, there's the I get a bit of it's a bit of history on Leeds, right, on how they're playing at the time. It's like we joked about like indoor soccer, how it's rock'em sock'em soccer, but I think this kind of it looked like a hockey game out of like the Broad Street Bullies era of the Phillies, right?
Yeah,
the Philadelphia Flyers.
And at that time, Leeds had a terrible like reputation for this, and there was like almost like accusations of like nepotism, almost that the league was favouring them for unknown reasons. But the press at large like hated them, and to this day, like opposing fans will still chant like dirty Leeds to them and that they hate them. It's kind of a reputation they never got rid of. Like headlines saying that like Leeds are scum and stuff was pretty common in newspapers, or Leeds are even like saying they're morons and stuff. I found a bunch of old headlines that people had, like Leeds have smashing time by the seaside. So like the marauding, cynical tactics of Leeds United, like they were hated. It wasn't just Clough, it was a very common viewpoint that Leeds of Don Revie were a filthy team that had skillful players, but still did a lot of like horrendous things that other teams just didn't get away with on the pitch for some reason.
Nice. And was this the peak of Leeds up to that point?
Like they've always been a successful club, but this was their most successful. Like if you look at their honours list, which I had up before, like they've been champions 3 times. It was 68, 73, and then 91, 92 the year before the Premier League. They were runners up in and around the mid 60s, 70s, and then other than that, they had a couple of lower league titles earlier on. But yeah, and then FA Cups and stuff. So this was their most successful period by a mile, yeah.
Yeah, and then they were successful again, kind of in the late 90s, early 2000s, until they eventually went down and, almost went into administration there. But I mean, for somebody, for a millennial my age, that's the Leeds that I remember. So this movie was a real eye-opener into how successful historically that team has been, and just the way football was actually played back in those days. I mean, it's a real eye-opener, and you hear these legendary names like Brian Clough and Peter Taylor, and now to actually be able to visualize that, I mean, it brought a lot out in me, and I just learned a lot of the history.
Yeah, even for somebody like me, it's interesting. Like I grew up in the mid 80s, was born in the mid 80s, so it was Liverpool that was a super successful team there, like Everton to a lesser extent. And then as soon as the Premier League kicked in,
Everton's always a lesser extent.
You would say that. It was like, and then it was Manchester United, so then it was like Cantona and stuff that was hated. So I could relate to this. Like Leeds United were the Manchester United of my era, were back in the 70s. It's something, football's Man City are fast becoming that. So thankfully there's other teams challenging them. But yeah, it's kind of something English football's always had, a team to hate. And I'm sure every league's the same, to be honest. I don't think any team celebrates dominance, like from the point of view of the other fans.
And when did field technology start to turn around? Because those are some like disgusting fields.
Oh, you know they were still like that in the 90s for sure.
That's awesome.
Yeah, I'm thinking I've seen Portsmouth play on pitches like that as an adult. So yeah, it's been a while. So it starts off with the context of all that. Kind of learn the roots of. So it starts off with Leeds' first day, Clough's first day. Sorry. We get the note. We realise that Peter Taylor, his long-time assistant, hasn't kind of joined him. It starts off with an FA. We go back in time to an FA Cup match between Leeds and Derby, when Leeds were the leaders of the first division and Derby was struggling towards the bottom of the second division. Clough sort of reveres Revy at this point, and he's very like, get the stadium spick and span, all this kind of stuff. Sets out a nice bottle of wine for them to have the customary after the game, and Derby lose 2-0. There's quite a lot of brutality, and then the biggest thing that happens is Clough is sat waiting to have this glass of wine with Revy, and Revy just leaves. Doesn't shake his hand when they leave the pitch either. Clough is kind of annoyed to the point where he knows his team are good on a technical level, but they need some more pros. So they signed a famous veteran called Dave Mackey, along with some other young players, and this is where you start to see Clough's like style of management, which I think was all the way through his career, of like this old school like wheeler dealer manager who would overcompass everything. It's not like now where teams have what do you call it, like a recruitment team or anything, or scouts. Like you'd have a couple of scouts and it's the manager doing all the work. So then you meet what's his name, Sam Longson, who's Jim Broadbent's character, who's the chairman, and he's super frustrated. Yeah. Well, you might know him from Harry Potter, yeah.
As a Canadian watching British movies, it's kind of like, which Harry Potter character was this?
Yeah.
I did not realize that just until you said that.
And Timothy Spall is also, that plays Peter Taylor, is it Ringworm or something?
Wormtail. He's Peter Pettigrew. Wormtail.
Peter Pettigrew,
yes. Yeah. It's like England only has like 30 celebrities and they've all been in Harry Potter.
Well, so I don't think Martin Sheen has, right? Surprisingly.
No, I don't think so.
He was in the Twilight series, another supernatural book adaptation, but he was never in Harry Potter from what I remember.
Missed out. Could have been in it.
But just going back to that interaction between Don Revy and Brian Clough, it's like Don Revy doesn't even know Brian Clough exists. He's just, Brian Clough's just saying, hey, come over here, and Don Revy just walks past, not even really giving a fuck, right? Just goes past, doesn't recognize his existence, and I think that's what really sets the tone for the rest of the film. Yeah.
And I don't know how true that is, whether that actually happened and that was the whole catalyst for that rivalry, but I do think it's probably common that when nowadays when a Premier League manager goes to a League Two team, that he probably has no clue who's the manager. And you'll just see a group of people on the dugout and might think, well, one of them must be the manager.
Was that even a rivalry though? Like it seemed like such a one-sided affair that.
Yeah, like Don Revy wasn't even bothered until Derby started winning trophies. He couldn't care less.
Yeah,
it was all about Clough's like drive to be better than him.
And actually, at the beginning of the movie, when Revy is leaving Leeds United, he says there's only one person for the job. So. Was that insinuating that he was actually giving Clough the recommendation to the board?
No, it's the other way around. Johnny Charles, one of the players, it was him that he thought should take the job. And he never did take the Leeds job as far as I know. Okay. It was kind of his thought that he should be like player manager of the club because he was someone that he'd brought up in his own, had been in that system for so long and should continue on the Leeds United way, kind of.
Interesting.
Yeah. So back to the film, they kind of lose 2-0, they start investing, and then... that's when they start climbing up the table. This is the one and only mention of Portsmouth in this film. You briefly see Derby overtake them on the Leeds table. Just put that in there.
Do you mean literally the word Portsmouth?
Yeah, that's it. That's all it is.
And where were they? Where was Portsmouth in the table at that time?
Oh, like 15th or something. It's not like that was earlier on in the season. It's not like we were rocketing sky high or anything.
I thought there was literally like a couple seconds where they were playing them or something.
It could have been, because some of it's in black and white, right? So you can't tell. So I've no idea. Maybe.
Hold out that hope, man.
Oh, yeah. So 1969, Derby are promoted. But then in their first league game back at Leeds again, they lose 5-0. The club did win the league championship in 72. Then they play the European Cup again. And then lose to Juventus in the semi-final because they didn't rest players. Clough uses his best squad in that game, and it's kind of a big deal because then they lose to Juventus, and it's Clough comes out and publicly has a pop at Jim Broadbent's character. Peter Taylor has a heart attack, and then Clough tries to secure their positions by offering their resignations, and then the chairman's just like, yeah, okay, we don't need you.
Sorry, did they show what ended up happening after they left? Like I know they kind of showed the interim where they went. I don't want to jump ahead, but they showed the interim there. But I don't know if they ever went back and showed, because they won the league at that point, right?
Yeah, and they were in the Champions League or the European Cup as it was called back then.
Right. So after he left,
oh.
I don't know if they ever went back and showed.
No, they just talked about it, didn't they? About the riots and stuff, and how they had a good home, and how I think it was Dave Mackay took over.
Did they continue to have success after that?
No, they did not. I don't. Oh no, they did. They won the title the season after, and then it was when they went into decline.
So that was one of the most interesting things. So you just mentioned Dave Mackay took over after Brian Clough, but earlier on in the movie, Dave Mackay is actually the big signing that Brian Clough makes, because Peter Taylor has found this guy to say he can really get us to the next level, even though he's old. He's still got the legs to really take us to the next level, and they did go to the next level. They won the title. But it's just interesting to see that Dave Mackay actually took over as manager of that team after Brian Clough had left.
Yeah, if you remember, Dave Mackay's the one who they go round to his house on a Sunday to try and convince him, because he's only 99% sure that he's signed for somebody else.
There was a line there. You can't sign players on the Sabbath.
Yes.
Was that true?
I don't know if that's... Maybe back then it was nothing. So back then, until even... Well, I remember growing up and nothing was open on a Sunday. Football wasn't played on Sundays.
Right. Well, even here, you go to the flea market on Sundays, and that's about it.
Yeah, kind of the same. You would have open-air markets that would be open, but yeah, it would just be like corner shops that are open at weekends to get your newspaper, on Sundays to get your newspaper. So maybe it is true. Maybe you weren't allowed to do football business. Maybe they actually signed him on the Monday. Not actually the Sunday. But so Derby did tailspin after then. I also want to say that Peter Taylor went back at some point in the 80s, but like they were fighting off relegation by that point. It's not like he went back and revived them. I
think it was during one of these scenes. It must have been during the Leeds scenes. But it was before one of the matches, and Brian Clough's in the locker room kind of giving them the pep talk. And these guys are sitting there with the full cups of teas and the coasters.
Oh, yeah. Like proper British sensibility of having a cup of tea to keep...
The full-out proper tea, yeah.
Yeah, so, like steady the nerves around the game and stuff, and
that is
calm down afterwards.
Like, I imagine now guys are pounding like Red Bulls in the locker room beforehand. These guys are sitting there with... like the teacups, right?
Cup of tea and an orange.
It's really a side of the game that you don't see, right? With the manager literally I think this is before the game that they won before they went to go play Juventus. He was sitting beside the players, rubbing their shoulders, saying, "Oh, that's a good lad. You're gonna go out and I don't think that many managers have that kind of interaction with their players, even in the dressing room to this day. Jurgen Klopp, maybe. But I think most managers probably don't have that kind of interaction these days.
Think about it. I don't know if you guys have watched that All or Nothing on Amazon, where it tracks through the season Manchester City won the title under Pep Guardiola. Like, every time at half-time when they're going in that training room, he stood there in front of a whiteboard or stood in the middle of a room. You're right, he's not like chumming up with the players and trying to G them up. It's like tactics, I'm telling you what to do. This is like, it's almost like a meeting. It's not the same. You're right, like the professionalism is a different thing. There's less of that man management in some regards, because I guess it's become more about the tactics, and the man management's like slightly moved to the side, whereas there it could be more of a difference if you got your players all psyched up and they went out and just happened to run harder because the manager had yelled at them, or because the manager had known which players to hug at the right time, or who to say you're doing a good job. It's definitely a different side to management that we've seen in England, I guess, in the Premiership era, right?
It's much more technical now, right? Like, you'd have the coach there with the whiteboard, the manager giving out the instructions.
Like that would never
team.
Yeah, even in this film, isn't it? When he goes to Leeds, and the managers are like, the players are like, well, why haven't we got our dossiers yet? Because Don Revie used to create dossiers, and Clough's like, who gives a fuck about Don Revie? And then he's
that
like,
part
well,
was so brutal.
And he's like, we'll tell you who will. All the fans stood out there on Saturday, and it's just like, some managers just didn't believe in that stuff. They believe we play the way we play, and that's it. It doesn't matter what the opposition are doing, which is still true to this day to some extent. But you've got to because it's that more technical, you do have to be able to adapt for sure.
But I think one thing people have to realize, even if they've watched this movie or not watched this movie, is that throughout his whole Derby tenure, since that whiskey glass scene, the jealousy and the absolute revenge factor to Don Revie has existed for Brian Clough. He wants to be better. He wants to win everything, and he wants to basically leave Don Revie in his shadow.
And he's like deceiving.
Yeah.
He calls him up late at night at like 3:00 on that one day to like call him out for everything, and he's like, "What are you doing? Go to bed, man."
Was there a large age difference there? Was there that many years between them? Like, was it more of a?
I'm gonna look that up because I'm not entirely sure. 19.
Because there's that scene, right, where they finally do speak face to face.
Actually, 8 years difference between them.
8 years? Okay, so only 8 years as senior. There's still a level of experience there that is just, it's not found, right, with Clough.
Yeah, it's weird, actually. If you look at their respective careers, they only started managing like 4 years apart, but the difference is, I guess, Brian Clough, because he retired earlier as a player, started in the lower leagues, whereas Don Revie went straight into that Leeds job, having played for them before. Which I think happened a lot more commonly then than it does now. Like a senior player retiring and becoming a manager.
Player manager, yeah. TFC had a couple of those.
Oh, yeah?
Well, TFC is a totally different story when it comes to any history before 2015. But
it's like there's two different clubs exist almost.
Yeah. Basically. So now Derby has not accepted the blackmail, essentially, that Brian Clough and, by virtue, Peter Taylor, have basically committed. So they're not taking their resignation letters. They said, you know what, you're going to show us this. We're basically going to let you go. So what happens next is that they get a call from Brighton and Hove Albion.
Yeah,
so
in the third division.
In the third division, which is, you go from Derby, who are the champions, way down, not to the second division, but the third division. And at that time, the important thing to realize is the first division, when we talk about the first division at that time, is what you would consider the Premier League at this time. And so they're going to what is equivalent of League One.
Yeah.
So tell us a little bit more about, Brighton and Hove Albion, what kind of club they were. So Brighton is on the south side, on the south coast of England, just a stone's throw away from France. Tell us a little bit more about that. Yeah.
They are not they're in their arguably in their most successful period. Like right now, being in the Premier League for 2 seasons, they've never, as far as I know, the best title they've ever won is the third division title. They've been FA Cup runners once. They've won lower league, semi-pro things back in the day, like in the 40s and stuff. But they're not a successful club. So even though they've never been successful since, they were never successful before that era. So it's no surprise that he really didn't want to go there. There's bigger teams on the south coast. Portsmouth for one. We have a bigger fan base.
I was going to say, can you name us a club on the south coast that might be bigger?
Yeah, there's one. As much as I hate them, I'd argue Southampton are probably a bigger club. Bournemouth might be a bit harder because Bournemouth's not got a huge fan base and a big stadium or anything. But yeah, they're just not a big club, so it's no wonder he was effing and blinding about not wanting to go there. But they still met with them and stuff, and even when they go down to Brighton, this is one of the bits I love, and this is something that still rings true to this day, I think. Clough's they don't want us down here. They love their own managers. We're Northerners. We need to be up north where we belong. And that's something that totally rings true to this day even. And even with Leeds themselves, if you look at their manager history, even it's all, for the most part, has been Northern managers, but almost between this era and modern day, with a couple of exceptions. They had a couple of foreign managers along the way, like Uwe Rosler, who's a German striker, and now they have Marco Bielsa. But if you look, they have a history of Yorkshire-born managers specifically, a handful of Scottish managers. They had Dennis Wise for a little bit. Mostly, they've always stuck by this sentiment of people not crossing, especially in the lower leagues, sticks. Portsmouth had a football manager once called Richie Barker that was quite successful with northern teams. I think it was Rotherham, and he was just never accepted by the Portsmouth fans purely because he was northern. So I do think in like an alternate history where Clough went to Brighton and Hove Albion, it didn't work out. He would have been fired again.
And it's amazing you bring that up because I mean, I have a lot of friends in the UK and the sentiment still is very much the same. And you can see it with Brexit even, right? Where I think the North voted mostly leave and the South voted mostly remain. And it's crazy to see what a divide there is really. And yeah, I mean, I'm a Liverpool supporter, so I interact with a lot of Liverpool fans and they feel like they're not even in the same country as where London is.
Yeah. And
right?
even Liverpool's a good example of a club. Like they had from Shankly, they had like that boot room tradition of it always being somebody promoted from within the club. And they didn't depart from that massively until Houllier came along. And then that's where that kind of, that longevity and that period with Roy Evans eventually stepping down disappeared. So a lot of clubs have had that like instilled in them, and it's only like now, it's only even recently starting to see foreign managers in like the Championship and stuff. Clubs typically stick to like British managers in the lower league, and then typically stick to somebody that can heavily identify with the region they're from. So like northern clubs love a like working class northern manager that understands where they're coming from. And like the best example of that at the moment, like succeeding in the Premiership, is Sheffield United's manager Chris Wilder. Like he's from Sheffield, he's like loves the place, and like he's the shining example of that system working when somebody truly loves the club and it's all they care about. I mean, he's dragged them up to whatever position, like 6th or 7th in the Premier League. So that's like, wow, like it still works, and the fans all love him. He's done like, he got them up twice, I think. So there is merit to it for sure.
And just kind of taking an aside from the film, and we'll get back to that in 1 minute. What are your opinions as a guy from England, from the South Coast? What are your opinions now that the game has become internationalized so much, and that there's foreign players, you buy the cream of the crop, there's foreign managers? Do you prefer one or the other, or do you think it's just part and parcel of the way, you know, that we are part of a global village?
It's part and parcel. I think you have to accept it, and it brought improvements, right? Like when Arsene Wenger transformed the Premier League almost single-handedly and made them realise like the boozing culture of like the likes of Paul Merson and Tony Adams at Arsenal couldn't carry on. And that was, you only have to read like Harry Redknapp's autobiography about how when he was West Ham manager, they would all go out drinking and they were all into gambling. So that continental like influence professionalised the game, like from this era that's in the movie that's carried on into, like, it wasn't uncommon for players to be drinking around the clock and stuff out, even up to like even England's Euro 96 campaign. They were all boozing every night in and around that. So I think it's a good thing. Like it improved the game, and as long as you've got players that care, then it doesn't matter where they've come from, does it? Let's be honest.
Awesome. So going back to the film now, I mean, we've deviated enough. Brighton and Hove Albion, it didn't work out. I mean, I think Peter Taylor wanted to stay there because they'd already signed a contract, and he is, you know, he genuinely wanted to keep the gentleman's agreement that he had with the Brighton board. Brian Clough, however, was not of the same mind.
Yeah, and this is where they have that massive argument, right?
The razzle
where Peter Taylor's like, you're just greed, you just are motivated by money and success-wise, it's never enough. And then Clough kind of slings it back at Peter Taylor's face, and he's like, you are so narrow-minded, and you're like
I think the argument was ambition, right?
Yeah, you have no ambition, basically.
Too much ambition versus not enough ambition.
Yeah, that was it. Yeah.
But it wasn't even, I don't even think it was that, right? Like, I think they were both off the mark where it wasn't really about ambition. It was more about proving Revy wrong, right? Where
like Clough wanted to go to a big club like straight away and get back at it and prove that he could be better than Leeds United.
His motivations were really clear.
Yeah.
And the context is that when they both had that gentleman's agreement with the Brighton board, they asked for a holiday, and I think they went to Spain. Was it, Adam?
Yeah. Mallorca. In Spain,
so they went to Mallorca in Spain, and at that point, some rep from Leeds United had actually found Clough and said, "Hey, we'd want to talk to you about an opportunity that just came up at Leeds United. Revy's becoming the England manager," and at that time, you know, something just sat in Clough's head, which is the same thing that's been in Clough's head throughout the whole movie, which is basically, this is his opportunity to be better than Revy. And that's where the argument with Peter Taylor started, because one had that greed. You can call it ambition, but really it's just that notion to be better than Revy versus a guy that's humble, someone who respects contracts, somebody who respects gentleman's agreement. And that's where we get to at that point in the movie.
One thing I think the movie didn't really make clear was that he actually did manage Brighton and Hove Albion for a while there. It seemed like he accepted the agreement and then he had his vacation. He accepted an offer from Leeds and left shortly after. But he did have a short spell at Brighton and Hove Albion where they really didn't do well. They had a few big losses. The movie kind of just glossed over that pretty quickly, which I think would have been interesting.
Yeah, it makes it seem like he just went.
Yeah, so I had to look it up afterwards. But it would have been kind of cool to see that where he was managing and his heart just wasn't in it. Because he did go from Derby where he was fully committed to Leeds where he did have something to prove. To have this kind of short stint in between would have been nice to see.
For sure. So yes, that happens. I guess they have that argument. And then we kind of, the storyline's present timeline is Clough alienating the players by telling them to throw away their medals because they weren't won fairly. And this is where you start to see that the Leeds players not accepting his methods. He asks them to play a 7-a-side game and he's like, no chance, well, that's not what we do. Revy didn't make us do that. And then we slowly start to see the season unfold, kind of. He reminds them that Revy's not there, like they've got to get used to his methods, and they start the season with that Charity Shield game, and this is where you see some great archive footage of Billy Bremner fighting with Kevin Keegan, and then they both get sent off and throw their shirts.
He would never stand a chance against Kevin Keegan.
Kevin Keegan was like pretty hard, like not, yeah. But then Billy Bremner also scary Scottish man, so I don't really know. But yeah, so then Leeds have to start the season without Billy Bremner. They have like a horrific start to the season and they're pretty much in danger of relegation.
An 11-game suspension for that.
Yeah, 11-game suspension, which Brian Clough's like, nah, fine him more, I don't care. Like, don't rule it. Because this is the thing, beneath it all, and I guess Billy Bremner somewhat got reassessed as a player when he died. He wasn't pure filth all the time. He was actually a skillful player and he was a good leader. But just it kind of got masked by this ultra aggressive and like things like the Charity Shield, a match that was televised and was a big deal. Like it's the opening centerpiece of the season, and then they just had it out with each other on the pitch. So yeah, they're at risk of relegation. Bremner and the players all air their grievances to the board, and then the club decides that it's not working and to terminate Clough's contract after 44 days. He forces them to give him like a crazy severance package. And then the film kind of ends with a bit of a sour note in some regards. So Clough agrees to do a final interview on Yorkshire TV. So not even like national TV, it's like on provincial TV. But they also get Revy to come in and confront him, which seems absurd. I just can't imagine a world where you get the national manager to come on TV and have it out with somebody that replaced him at club level. But they kind of do. Clough accuses Revy of being cold-hearted and dishonest, both as a player and as a person and a manager. Revy says that Clough's like egocentric and points to like throughout the film it's kind of permeated with all these interviews that Clough did. There's like a clip of Muhammad Ali talking about Brian Clough because they both happen to appear on the Parkinson Show together. He was kind of a famous talk show host from back in the day. And then, yeah, they kind of have it out at this point about the 1968 FA Cup, with Revy kind of telling to him, like, I didn't know who you were. I didn't try to, belittle you by not shaking your hand and coming for a drink. I guess the one point is, earlier we were talking about the dossiers that he was famous for. Surely he had a dossier about Derby, as
true.
little as they were. So he probably did know who Clough was. He probably knew how they played. You'd also point to the fact some of the dirty tactics, so they probably knew which players to single out. So then at this point, we kind of find out Clough goes to Brighton, doesn't he, to make up with Taylor. This is a brilliant scene. Like Taylor basically makes him grovel to him, like
get on his
knees, apologize.
Before that, he sits in the studio for a while, right? Like it takes him a moment to realize that everything this guy has said to him, he's been kind of pursuing this guy's career, trying to have his number. Yeah. And he just lays it out for him. He just kind of sits there and he fully accepts it. And then on the car ride to Taylor's house, he just kind of has it out in front of his kids and just
Peter Taylor makes him call him baby. Which is
baby,
quite
yeah.
And it's
again, you don't know if that's great writing or if that's actually what happened.
Just a bit of
because
improv.
right, exactly. But it's a great. It's a great insight into the relationship between Brian Clough and Peter Taylor, even historically. You could tell that they were very close. They were brothers, right? Even his kids were like Uncle Pete,
yeah.
right? They were brothers. They were more than just friends. They were co-workers. They were colleagues. They were brothers. And then that relationship broke down during the Brighton days. And then I think after the whole Leeds fiasco, it hit Brian Clough to say, hey, why am I trying to chase this guy when I can make my own legacy with my best friend? And, they went on from there to achieve great things in the future.
Clough went on to manage Nottingham Forest, and then Peter Taylor actually joined him afterwards, right? A few years after.
Yes, they made up and were reunited. And again, Nottingham Forest, you'd call them like a small provincial team. Like Nottingham's not a huge city; it's a moderately sized city. It's not massive, and like to have taken another club of that well and get them into the first division, win the title, and then go one better or two better by winning the Champions League 2 years in a row is just incredible.
And he's still and that's still the only British team that's ever repeated European Cup titles.
Only British team.
Yeah.
Only British manager. Yeah, it's something.
Only British manager. Sorry, not the only British team, but the only British manager.
Yeah, I don't think we'll see that
Cup,
again.
right?
Yeah,
because Liverpool's won it in 77 and 78.
Oh, okay, sure. Yeah. But yeah, we'll never see that happen again because there's so few British managers out there, especially at the elite level. I just can't see, and England don't dominate Europe like they have done in other periods to the same extent. So that'll never be repeated. So he does that. Don Revie. So Don Revie failed as England manager, I guess. I gotta look up. I forget, we didn't qualify for another major tournament, I believe. 1978 World Cup. Yeah, we basically flopped there too. Really lost to teams we shouldn't be. Only managed to beat Luxembourg 2-1, and this is in an era where those teams were nowhere near being professional. And then basically, though, the thing that is really crappy about Don Revie is he was known for business dealings and stuff, and he went behind the English FA's back and agreed to manage the United Arab Emirates. And then not only did he do that, but then instead of having the decency to tell the FA that he was quitting, he sold the story exclusively to the Daily Mail for £20,000. So that's how the English FA found out that he was turning his back on England. The FA were fuming. They suspended him from 10 years from playing, managing football in any capacity in England. And then to what happened, he was labelled a mercenary and vilified. He was meant to be there to help them secure a long-term legacy with the aim of qualifying for I think it was Italia 90, but he was sacked by 1983, and on 1980 he was sacked, and then he took charge of a team in the Arabian Gulf League, and then he got fired from there again, went to an Egyptian club, didn't settle there, and eventually returned to England, but he never worked again. He basically killed his entire career, motivated purely by greed and money, it seems, at some point.
So Adam, in England now, is he seen as a good manager but vilified, or is he seen just as a hated caricature of English football? What is the general sense if you talk to anybody? If you say the words Don Revie, not in Leeds, but let's say in the streets of London, you say Don Revie and you're talking to somebody that knows about football, what is the general consensus there?
Hated, I think. I think everything, people will remember him for the crappy style of football that Leeds played, that's commonly associated with his Leeds team, and then they remember him for screwing over England. And that's all people remember him for. I asked my dad what he thought of him, and he's just shithead. He's just not.
Don't speak ill
well
of the dead.
Thought of. I know, it's a terrible thing to do. He did tragically, unfortunately, die of. He had MS, motor neurone disease. So he had and died probably too young, like at 61. So like he had a terrible life, but then that doesn't downplay what he kind of did. So yeah, I don't think people like him.
So one other thing I wanted to mention about the movie, we've told it in a very linear way. The movie itself actually jumps back between Clough's time at Leeds, which is where it actually starts off, versus his time at Derby County, and kind of just talks in flashbacks and present time, things like that. And throughout the whole movie, when they do show the scenes at Leeds, you can really see that he's not respected by the players, he's not respected by the board, he basically talks a lot of shit most of the time.
I think the movie does a great job of, like, they tell the story out of chronological order, but what they do is they set up a moment in the present of the movie, so 74, that kind of frames a narrative, and then what they'll do is they'll go back to a previous season, right, from 68 to 73, that kind of plays out that narrative, right, and explore it a bit further. So it's really cool because you see the parallels between Leeds United, how they just don't respect him. I mean, to flat out say like, oh, we'll speak our minds if he's out of the room, and then just tear him down when he's just outside the door, versus how he was adored by his players when he was at Derby, right?
It's really well done. It ties everything together, and really well how it makes you, just in case you're only watching it casually, like with the graphics every time the years do roll back, because it doesn't roll back sequentially. Sometimes it'll miss a year and roll back to like the Derby time. So yeah, there's a really good job of just like showing graphics on the screen that scroll back.
Yeah, I kind of hate when movies do that, when they kind of jump out of chronological order, but they leave the viewer to kind of pick up the pieces and kind of figure out where things are by small visual clues,
visual
right?
details.
Like, I hate that. I didn't see The Witcher on Netflix, but I heard that was kind of like that, where it was almost a guessing game of when things were taking place.
Well, the worst example of it is Westworld. I don't know if you've ever watched that.
No.
But you have to be constantly cued into basically what outfits people are wearing, because that's the only hint you get. Sometimes it's a different timeline.
Yeah.
And so much to the point where you can get to like the penultimate episode and not realize there's been two timelines running the whole time.
Yeah, I hate that. I guess people make the viewer work for it in some cases, but not to that extent where you're just completely confused. Yeah, it's almost like a dream sequence, right? Don't do that.
Yeah, you can't tell what to do.
All right, so that was basically the end of the movie. He's basically begging Peter Taylor to be his friend again, essentially, in front of his kids, begging on his knees, and then end credits roll, and it basically says that him and Peter Taylor eventually went to Nottingham Forest and won a bunch of trophies, including 2 European Cups. So that is the end. In your opinions, as a film, what would you rate this movie out of 5 stars?
Ooh, 5. I didn't know we were rating out of 5 stars.
We're doing it now.
It's a 5 for me.
It's a 5.
Yeah, and I think the main reason is Michael Sheen's performance. Like, he's like a really good like chameleon. He can become any character. At the end, they show you real clips of Clough in like studios and stuff, and it kind of, obviously they try to make him look as much as he can like, but he's still going to look like Michael Sheen. But it shows that he kind of nailed a lot of the mannerisms of Clough. Like, they show Peter Taylor and Clough in a TV studio at the end, like the real life people, and like he's spot on, got the mannerisms, and that's what sells the whole film to me, is his like bob on like portrayal of Clough. And I even knew that like Clough was a manager like into the Premier League era, so even me as like a child at that time, like when Clough was still managing, was still somewhat familiar with him, and like I instantly felt like he was him, and that helped me buy into the film, because the film's all about him, right? Like, so many of the football scenes, obviously you get the archival footage, but then you also get a lot of it from his point of view. Like, it's the camera pointing at the dugout and seeing him react to it, or the scene you talked about before where the lighting, where he's in the dressing room, it's all about him, and just his whole performance is like enrapturing in a way that just makes it like a 5-star film for me.
Yeah, I think for me, it's definitely a 4 out of 5. As I mentioned at the very beginning of this podcast, that this isn't only a great soccer movie, this is a good film, just the way it's shot, the visualizations, the acting, like you said. Sheen has just done a brilliant job, and Peter Taylor, or Wormtail, whatever you know him as, has yeah. I mean, the acting was superb. You felt all sorts of emotions when you watched this movie. So you were happy when they were doing good. You kind of felt sorry for Brian Clough or Sheen at this point. At some point when he was at Leeds. But yeah, this movie was brilliant. So a solid. Actually, I'm going to say 4.5 out of 5. 4.5 out of 5.
I didn't know if half stars were on the docket, so I'm going to go 4.5 as well. Yeah, it's not a perfect movie. I mean, the one thing that threw me off was probably Bremner's wig, if that was a wig. Do you guys know what I'm talking about?
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah. I'm assuming Cole Meany's is a wig as well, Don Revy, because he doesn't have hair like that, I don't think.
No, he was on Star Trek, right? That's the same guy.
Oh, yeah.
Right.
He was like engineer guy or something, yeah.
Like, all joking aside, it's an awesome movie. The way they framed the narrative, acting, the cinematography of it, I think everything was amazing. It's a shame that Tom Hooper's kind of sullied his career with Cats, but I'm probably going to go back and watch a few other movies in his filmography. I really did enjoy this movie. All right, boys, it's time for a segment called Footy Flicks. So every podcast episode, we're going to take a look at the on-field scenes from the movie, give them a little bit of a rating, discuss them, laugh at them if they're terrible. So we actually did touch on the scenes in this movie earlier on in the podcast. What do you guys think?
So I'll say my absolute favorite scene as a Liverpool fan was when Keegan essentially fought Bremner. It was beautiful to watch. That's the kind of player Keegan was. And actually, I believe it's that same scene that I've seen being replayed on LFC TV where...
Oh, probably, yeah.
I think it was where some kids were showing the current Liverpool players what football used to be like back in the day. And I think they pulled up that scene. And all the players had such a laugh out of it.
But I feel like there's a bit of a bias coming from you on that one. I mean,
not at all. Come on.
It could have been filmed with an iPhone like 3G, and you probably still would have enjoyed it.
I would never be biased. You know that.
So we touched on it a bit earlier, where they mixed in some archival footage with the footy scenes, and it was cool. It was a really cool effect. Adam talked about how when it was kind of zoomed in and there was no football skill whatsoever.
Yeah,
it was obvious those were filmed.
Slight kick, but nothing.
Yeah, that was really cool. Even I think there were some parade scenes as well, right, where they mixed in that footage. It was a really cool effect. Yeah, I mean, they had the luxury of kind of being based on a true story where they could do that. Yeah, they could take some archival footage. It's kind of nice. Like, it's almost like a bit of a pseudo documentary look at it. I'm sure when we look at movies later on, they won't have that luxury and they'll be pretty terrible. But we're starting on a high note here.
Yeah.
So I'm going to rate these scenes really highly. I don't know about you guys.
Same. I think it helps that they use archive footage, so it's like real, and then the use of the actors that are playing those characters is good as well for the meaningful moments. Like, they show a lot of the more brutal scenes, like of Leeds being violent in those like terrible muddy pitches. Like in my notes, I wrote about how the brutality of some of those scenes is shown with the actors rather than the archives. A lot of them, except for the infamous ones, but the lesser ones, they do a good job of showing them like mud flinging all over the place with the actors.
And those were actual scenes from matches? Like, that was pretty much, like I said earlier, it was pretty much a hockey game.
Yeah. Stuff like that happened. That's what Leeds were like, definitely. Like, they were filmed.
Yeah, and I mean, I feel the same way, right? The mixture of the archive footage with the actors, I think it just brought it all more to life and made us realize that this actually happened, right? That this movie is based on a true story. It's not a work of fiction, and that was really beautiful to see.
Yeah, it's cool. I think it's going to be all downhill from here. So unfortunately, we started on a high note.
No, there's going to be our next film. There's some good ones for sure.
I'm looking forward to Goal 3, seeing some of those ones.
Oh, yeah.
I'm not sure if they did use green screen in any of these scenes, but it wasn't noticeable at all. I guess the film grain helped with that.
Yeah, because it can lower the quality,
Yeah, exactly. So would have been able to hide a bit of that. So going back to some of those scenes, so what would have warranted a yellow card? Like a full-out elbow to the face doesn't do it?
Yeah, no. And like even tackles from behind 2-footed were allowed as long as you got the ball. That was a legit... It didn't matter if you took the player first. You were allowed to. So I remember for a long time, my dad like hated the fact that they had changed that rule that a tackle from behind wasn't allowed. He thought it was part of the game. If you get the ball, it's fair game. Like, so yeah, I just over Like if it's off the ball, I guess would be he didn't get the ball out of it. Would be where he'd get red cards.
So pretty much
just
you
ridiculous.
get the ball, that's it, yeah. There was one part in one of the footy
good.
scenes where a guy went down and he's actually being carried off by one of the physio guys as a piggyback ride.
Yeah. Because I guess they didn't have all the stretchers we have now. Or like the stretchers were lightweight, so they couldn't get them on the pitch as easily.
Right, yeah. So, yeah, the guy's just carrying him off like a 4-year-old child. That was awesome.
Yeah.
All right, great. So, Footy Flicks, we're going to rate this one highly, all three of us.
Yeah, sounds good. So next up we have trivia, guys. So I have picked 3 questions for each of you from the era of this movie, give or take. So we're looking at the 60s and 70s. Mark, you can go first. Do you want pile A or pile B?
Give me pile B.
Okay. Your first question is, in 1967-68, which team became the first English team to win the European Cup? Liverpool, Tranmere, Everton, or Manchester United?
Ooh. I'm going to go with, and I wish I could read Regev's face right now to see if he can give me a hint. I'm going to go with Man United.
Correct. So a point to you.
Look
Well
at
done.
you.
In 1978 and 1979, who won the Ballon d'Or? Kevin Keegan, Karl-Heinz Rummenigge, Franz Beckenbauer, or Pele?
Who's that question to?
To Mark, sorry.
Oh, I thought it was one question each.
Nah, go. Do all 3.
Shit, Adam, you're going to have to read it again, man. I wasn't listening.
All right. So again, this is your second question, Mark. In 1978 and 1979, who won the Ballon d'Or? Kevin Keegan, Karl-Heinz Rummenigge, Franz Beckenbauer, or Pele?
I am going to say Beckenbauer only because I think Pele had already moved on to the Cosmos at that point.
You're actually wrong. It was Kevin Keegan.
Yes, that's what I was going to say.
He played for Hamburg at the time, I believe, and had 2 absolutely cracking seasons there. And your last question, Mark, so you have got 1 so far. Your last question is, who managed England for just 7 games in 1974 following the departure of Alf Ramsey? Was it Don Revie, our famous friend from the movie, Ron Greenwood, Walter Winterbottom, or Joe Mercer?
I'm going to say Don Revie.
Nah, it was Joe Mercer.
Seriously?
Yeah, so there must have been a gap in between.
I was going to say, so Clough took over in 74 because Revie left for the national team.
Yeah, so there must have been a gap in between England failing to qualify for the World Cup and Revie starting. He must have played friendlies or something.
I don't believe you, man.
So anyway,
You
got
VAR?
1.
Is there
Right.
VAR on this trivia game, or?
Afraid not.
Damn.
You should have read up on your history more. So Raghav, you get the other pile of questions.
I'm ready.
So you only need to get 1 to beat Mark.
All right.
In 1973, which Division 2 side beat Leeds United to win the FA Cup final? Was it Southampton, Oldham Athletic, Sunderland, or Sheffield United?
I am going to say Sheffield United.
I'm afraid you're wrong. It was Sunderland.
Ah, that's going to be my other guess.
In 1971, who did Chelsea beat in the European Cup Winners' Cup final to claim their first European trophy? Barcelona, Tottenham Hotspur, Bayern Munich, or Real Madrid?
Barcelona.
I'm afraid it was the other Spanish team, Real Madrid.
Ah,
Okay, so last question to redeem yourself and come out of this level with Mark. Which English footballer played as a winger for Arsenal from 1962 to 1977, scoring 621 goals, playing 621 games, and scoring 68 goals? Johnny McLeod, David Court, Bob Wilson, or George Armstrong?
I'm going to say C. I have no idea.
C was Bob Wilson. No, he was famously a goalkeeper. So it was impressive if he would have scored 68 goals, but it was George Armstrong. So I guess Mark takes the lead for trivia in week 1 with 1 point.
1 point.
And the intention is we'll kind of rotate each who's the question answer each week, so we can kind of
wear
win
Quizmaster. Is it a Quizmaster armband or is it a hat, like a Harry Potter style?
It's an armband for sure.
An armband? Okay.
Yeah.
Maybe
Maybe we'll get one actually made.
All right.
We'll look into the
sure,
budget,
let's go
see if
for
we can get one made.
All right, sounds good.
All right. So wrapping up these episodes, every show we're going to do a table rating. So we have a match day matinee table. We're going to take a look at the movie, and who knows, if we get enough movies, there may actually be promotion or relegation. So pro rel in North America, who would have thought? So being as there's only one movie, it's going to take first.
Yeah, first place. Best football movie ever.
I expect it to finish quite high at the end of the season, though. I'm not. If I'm going to give my early season predictions, I don't see this one dropping too much, to be honest.
It'll take something special to top it, I think.
We've come to the end of our show. Thank you so much for joining us, to listening to our first episode where we've reviewed The Damned United. Next time, we'll be reviewing Mike Bassett, England Manager, which is a hilarious mockumentary. Adam, I know you've seen it. Mark,
it's a serious documentary. Wait, give it the credit it's due.
Mark, I know you haven't, and for the rest of you that haven't, you can watch it on YouTube now. But for now, we're out. Adam, if our listeners want to find you, where can they find you?
You can find me on Twitter, Flameboy84. I'm trying to stream a bunch of old Sensible soccer matches so people can see it on there and watch games live streamed on there.
And Mark?
I'm on Twitter at Mark83 and also on Instagram at A3Football. A couple new projects coming soon that I'll be putting up on A3Football, so check that out. And
for myself, Raghav Sandhu, you can find me on twitter.com/Raghav Sandhu. We're out for now, but catch us next time when we review Mike Bassett, England Manager.